So as you know, we are in the season of January, which I'm calling the Firm Foundation. We're kind of talking about the foundations of our faith. And we started with understanding ourselves as living stones, because even though it sounds counterintuitive to start with yourself, here's the truth. You cannot read Scripture, understand God, understand community if you don't start with who you are and your own biases and thoughts and beliefs and experiences, right? You need to navigate all of that. And so we're reminded that we're living stones. There's something beautiful about us and something meaningful about us and purposeful. And then last week we reminded ourselves that God is the rock of our salvation. God is immovable. We can excavate God and there's still just more God, right? God is there. God is solid. And this Sunday we are thinking about how we navigate one of the most precious things that we have that set us for a good foundation, and it's how we interact with the time that we are given on earth. Some wisdom for us to think about how we spend our time. And we've talked about it as sort of the gifts of seasons, right? What a gift time is. And of course, we often, all of us, mark time in different ways. I've never taken much stock in how the stars aligned when you were born, on the day you were born, and that it means something. But for whatever it's worth, I'm an Aquarius. And some people think that's really, really helpful and interesting, and I don't mind that, right? It doesn't offend me at all. We know that the church does things like that, has these seasonal ideas of what it means to be the church. We mark times in our church calendar by seasons, right? Lent, Easter egg hunt, Easter, Pentecost, summer school break, fall kickoff, stewardship, Advent, Christmas, Epiphany. We may have put some in that aren't technically in there. Easter egg hunt is not technically a season of the church, but we love it, right? So some of those traditions we've added. That's what happens when you kind of navigate seasons of life. And it's hard to understand time as anything other than a function or a product of who we are navigating the world and interacting with the world. And I think it helps us to have milestones, right? To things you can look back on. If you got a 4th grade Bible, if the things that you received as a kid, kind of helps you navigate your own faith. We do confirmation here, and so there's a certain rite of passage for us where we allow kids the time to think about their faith, and then at the end, we have a big ceremony that says, good job, you did it, right? And of course, we know that there are seasons of time in nature. We are in winter, apparently, as there are seasons of time with school. And again, it just gives us meaning, right? We know that when the snow is falling, it's different than when it's sunny out, or it may be snowing and sunny, but it's still really, really, really cold. Seasons give us a way to make meaning out of our time. And currently, our house, as for me and my house, we are following the Big Bear Eagles. And they are not a sports team, but they are in Big Bear, and there's a camera on them, and they are nesting hard. There's fluff now in the nest bowl. I don't know if you know what that is, but I know now what that is, the center part. And they are coming in and out a little more frequently. So I am on eaglet watch. Well, at least egg-laying watch, right? We don't know if they will be successful, but they were very successful last year. And yes, you will hear about it from time to time. You're welcome. So it might be, because we're talking about time, it might be a little jarring for us to hear a scripture that's normally seen in memorial services. With that a little jarring, you're like, usually Ecclesiastes and Psalm 23, right, are usually things that can be read during worship, but usually they're read in a memorial service or a funeral. And it's always struck me that it would be interesting to actually unpack some of that before we get to that point, right? It struck me that oftentimes when we are at a memorial funeral service, I feel like whenever I lead one, it's my job to both honor the family, but also honor the time we're in, right? And give people a word of hope and meaning, even in the midst of death. And so usually when you see someone who's passed away, and yesterday was the 1-year anniversary of my dad's passing, so it was not a fun day for me. And I actually went off social media as a result of it and kind of just took some time and did some things. But it's interesting to remember back and think through when my mom died in 2010 and my dad died last year. Initially, you get an obituary, obviously, but at first, you just have a date, right? You have 2 dates, the day of birth and the day of death, right? Let's interact. I know it's cold, but let's get the juices flowing. And in between it is what?
Life.
Littlest tiny dash. And that dash holds a world. It holds a lifetime. That little tiny dash. We only see the birth and the death part and then that little tiny dash. It's so small, but it represents so much. An entire life wrapped up in a single little image. And so today is how we will fill that little dash that will come for us all. What we will do with our time on earth, what we will do with all the time and the blessings we've been given. Time is an interesting thing. If you've ever written in a journal or a big calendar person, does anyone here write journals? I do. I find it really helpful. You kind of put your thoughts out in somewhere else and then you can kind of read them back later. It gives you a really specific way of viewing time. Of course, journals help us chronicle moments that can get lost in our memories, and I find the older I get, the less I remember certain things, right? Even of the past, but also like I walked into this room, what am I getting? But I can remember the Taylor Swift lyrics from 3 years ago, right? Like my memory and time acts differently, right? And I don't know about you, but the world right now just seems like a lot, right? There are videos of terrible things going on all around the world, but particularly in the United States. And so what's going on in Minneapolis, as we've seen, and there's other places, West Chicago, Portland, lots of other places. I have lots of UCC pastor friends that live in Minneapolis, and they are doing the amazing good work. But I also have a friend that lives in Minneapolis. He is by no means liberal. In fact, I would call him not liberal at all. He graduated Wheaton College, and him and his wife live in Minneapolis. They live in a neighborhood that's lovely, and they do ministry there. And what I will tell you is he is by no means someone that doesn't want things that are law and order-ish to succeed. He is someone who wants everything to go well in the country. He's not by any means against this current administration. And yet he and his wife are sharing story after story after story of what they're seeing when they drop their kids off at school. And so I hope we're not dismissing this as something over there or something someone else believes. And it seems to me that these things going out on social media are becoming for us sort of a world journal, right? A world that is telling us what's going on through video, through images, through words, through storytelling. And I want us to believe those things, right? I want us to understand and believe those things and not deny it, right? There's something going on in our country that is a little bit less than good, I would say, right? I will tell you what is brave, though, in the middle of it. We always look for the people that are brave, and I will look in the middle of it, and I said it last week, there's no greater love than to lay down one's life for one's friend. And in the midst of our time, as we look to our neighbor and self, who are our friends, who are our neighbors? Again, it's far braver to stand up for your neighbor than to hide behind a mask, I think. And it's amazing, the devastating thing we are realizing is that this human online journal called the internet, called social media, and each day we are waking up to thousands of new entries that horrify and sadden us and maybe help us deny a little bit. And we know about Nicole Good. She gave her life for her friends, I think set a good example for her children. And I know that Jesus met her with good and faithful servant. You have done well. She says she's a Christian. And yet she's being mocked and defamed online. Her son, who's a little kid, his school was doxxed, right? Which means the information got out. People are harassing a little kid who lost his mother, right? And so I think there's something in our consciousness that we need to reckon with as Christians. We have to figure out what it means that this is the time we are alive. We're alive in no other time. We are alive in this time. And I'm grateful to have been alive for so much goodness in the world. And so some of what I love to do, or think that what is good for us to do in these moments where I think, if it's not just me, all of our anxiety is kind of high. And so we either want to say, I'm going to step away and not realize what's going on, or we lean too much into it's called doom scrolling, and we go, oh, and over again. I think something that is a good resistance is whimsy and creativity and a little bit of fun. And so I want to tell you, if I may, a fun sort of conspiracy, it's fun, don't worry about it, of someone that lives in Chicago. She calls herself your Chicago downtown auntie. She's probably about my age. And her name is Becky in Chicago, if you want to follow her on social media. And I shared this video online because I thought it was really kind of unique. And she says she has this conspiracy theory. She has this theory She thinks the reason our country is in a mess, of course not really, just jokingly, is because, or many of us call like the worst timeline we're in, the upside down, because in 2016, two extremely cursed baseball teams met. Who were they? The Cubs and Cleveland Browns. I looked at it, I know, I'm sports. Who am I? I'm here in sports. Okay. And as we know about curses in the sportsball world, curses die hard. Not just the movie, but they die hard, right? And so there is this team, these two teams that come together, and of course, they get to whatever, the seventh game, right? So it's just the curse is dying hard. It's like win and lose is who's going to win. Now, I didn't follow it, but I'm just imagining that's what you all were thinking. Who cared and followed this team? And the universe is not going to let go, right? There's a rain delay on the last game, right? It gets down to the last bit. And then who wins? The Cubs. And she believes it ripped a paradox, created a paradox in time and space, taking us back to when the Chicagos began that curse so long ago. When was that? 1945. 1945, the curse began. What was happening in 1945? Nazis and rumors of Nazis. Fascism was in the air. Like, she is kind of looking and going, ooh, maybe this ripped the space-time continuum and we are on the wrong timeline. So, she thinks the only one that can close this looping rip hole paradox of being in the wrong timeline is what city? Chicago. We started it. We got to finish it. So the Bears have a chance. So I could care less about football. I am going to watch the game today. The Bears have a chance. We open the timeline rip, Chicago, in 2016, and we can close that thing back up again. And she says even the Catholics are on our side, right? Last year, the Catholics gave a Hail Mary pass, and they chose who for a pope? A Chicago pope, coming out of left field. Like, I think she thinks even like in the conclave, they're like, I don't know what we're supposed to do about this timeline, but woo, something has got to change what's going on. Chicago pope. Not only a Chicago pope, but a Chicago pope who famously follows all the teams and cares about sports. Maybe he can restore the timeline to its original state. And so tonight, yes, I know there's a football game tonight. You're shocked I know this, but that is how serious this is to me. Tonight, the Bears play who? The Rams, right? Coming from LA. I honestly have to tell you, we never had a football team growing up, so I have no love for the Rams, but go Bears. Anyway, so, and what city, again, I did this extra work. What city and what team started the original curse lift from Chicago in 2016 that put them in line for the national pennant? Do you know what city they were from? LA. It was the Dodgers. So Dodgers began that winning streak. So, needless to say, even though I'm from LA, I will be rooting for the Bears today. The Bears today. Maybe they can close this crazy, chaotic loop we're in. Of course, that's not true. It's whimsical and fun in troubling times. I find that when we can be creative and interesting, I don't know, it helps my mental state a little bit. Because in the face of horror, only whimsy and joy and happiness and beauty can come against it. We must resist, but we must never resist with the tools of oppression. When a world is on fire and full of injustice, it should wake us up to what's going on in the world and in our lives. What it shouldn't do is unleash our own meanness or cynicalness or contemptuousness. That is why our thing is make America what? Kind again. And if you want to grab a sign, you don't even need to put money anywhere. There's signs in Dobbstaff. I will be carrying that tomorrow. Make America kind again. Now, I know this is sort of silly and intense, but we are in troubling times, right? We are in troubling times. We are looking around and seeing a world that we don't want to live in, that does things in order for law enforcement, in order to do things that we don't necessarily want to do. And so my timeline, or my For You pages, are filled up with lots of trauma and pain. Are yours? a lot of doom scrolling, a lot of pain, a lot of trauma. And for those of us who are sensitive, it makes sense that we are reacting to this in many ways. And of course, this is a journal of our pain and trauma, and we will, right now and on social media, there's this going back to 2016. What would you whisper in the ear of January in 2016 to your 2016 self? And there's been some fun and interesting ones, but it is generally interesting to go back and see the pictures and images and places you were 10 years ago. And so here's a journal entry that came up on my timeline. Terrible things are happening outside. Poor, helpless people are being dragged out of their homes. Families are torn apart. Men, women, and children are separated. Children come home from school to find their parents have disappeared. Journal entry, January 13th, 1943. Anne Frank. Do you know if Anne Frank was alive today, she'd be 97 years old. We would have all been alive for her. This is not some bygone era, right? And it seems when we read that it happened in a galaxy far away, long, long ago, right? But it didn't. She died in a concentration camp in 1945. And I think she did what she could at 1943. There was not a whole lot she could do. And she did what she could, right? For her, it was a time to share and write the truth of her experiences, what she saw, what she experienced. I don't think she did it to become rich or famous. She didn't know that anyone else would probably read this journal. You know, because she said some weirdly personal things in it. She probably did it because she was a bit bored, but she probably also did it because her nervous system couldn't contain everything that she was witnessing. We are not meant to see acts of violence over and over and over again. Our bodies are not meant for it. And so she did what only she could do, was write it all down, and had no idea that it would reverberate throughout all time and history. What we do, big and small, in moments of historical reshaping of this world matters. And so the question is, what time is it for us? What season is it for us? What would you write in your diary today that might help someone navigate what it was like to live today if they read it 100 years from now? My favorite poet, Mary Oliver, says, "What will you do with this one wild and precious life?" That dash, right? We're back to that dash. The smallest part of the obituary beginning holds the biggest part of their time on earth. I've heard it said that our happiness depends on what we do in each moment and the choices we make. And so it's helpful for us to live into that, making the kinds of decisions that our 8-year-old self would be proud of, and our 88-year-old self would look back on with courage and conviction and be like, well done. What will you do with this wild and precious life? There's time to contemplate and pray and discuss how best to love our neighbor and make America kind again, but there's also a time that comes up where we show up for our neighbors and we stand up for them. I believe this time is now. Even when it's very, very cold, this time is now. I believe our time for status quo, silence is over. As Martin Luther King famously said, our lives begin to end the day we become silent about things that matter. I'm going to end with an insight and challenge from an influential pastor. His name is Reverend Dr. Sidney Williams. He's a senior pastor of a church in New Jersey. He also runs a nonprofit that helps refugees, and he wrote these words this week that got to me. This past Sunday morning, federal immigrant agents conducted a raid on Speedwell Avenue in Morristown, near where he lives. People were detained in public spaces, families were shaken, fear moved quickly through a community that already lives with so much uncertainty. But let me be clear, this is not just about immigration. This is about a recurring pattern of dehumanization, a cycle this nation returns to whenever fear is weaponized and certain groups are marked as disposable. The African American community recognizes this pattern because we have lived it. We've lived in its policing, its prisons, its schools, its housing, its healthcare, and its economy. Black Lives Matter for me is not a slogan, but it is truth. It is a moral declaration of living in a life that matters no matter what you look like. We have seen this pattern before. The labels change, but the logistics stays the same. First, people are reduced to categories. Those categories are framed as threats. Then fear is justified as policy. And finally, cruelty is normalized in the name of order. Language matters. There's no such thing as an illegal person under U.S. law. People may be undocumented, but undocumented status is a civil matter, not a criminal identity. When people are described as unlawful, it becomes easier to deny them dignity, protection, and compassion. For more than a decade, his group, Table of Hope, has walked alongside immigrant families in Morris County, feeding children, supporting parents, and helping families stabilize. These are not strangers to us. These are our neighbors, and what happens to them reveals who we are becoming. And so this is his prophetic warning for his community and ours. A society that normalizes dehumanization will always need a group to fear. A church that refuses to speak forfeits its moral authority. And a democracy that trades dignity for control will eventually lose both. History will remember who stood for justice and who chose silence and complicity. Scripture is clear. Woe to those who make unjust laws, to those who issue oppressive decrees, Isaiah 10:1. God's judgment does not fall on the vulnerable, but rather on systems that profit from fear and call it righteousness. To our immigrant neighbors, you are not alone, we see you. To the wider community, this moment is a test, not of politics, but of conscience. As for us, as for our church, he says, we will continue to stand for dignity, truth, and justice, because a faith that does not confront dehumanization of God's children is not a faith at all. And so as we end this, the question is, what will you do with your one wild and precious life? What will you do with the time you are given? What will that small little dash be filled with? How will you live more fully into the gift of the season of your life right now? Here's the truth. You can't do everything, right? You can't do everything. But like Anne Frank, you can do something. You can do something amazing. And again, somewhere, right now, there's a scared 12-year-old girl. She's in West Chicago. She's in Minneapolis. She might be in Portland watching weird frogs dance around. And she's writing in her journal or her diary right now about today's world in 2026. And my question to all of us is, what do you want her to write? What do you want her to say about the church today? About those of us in the suburbs? What do you want her to say about you and I? What do you want her to write about who showed up in these moments? So we're going to sing a song. We're going to hear a song. And here's how it goes. And I'm going to end with this. For everything there is a time, a season for each thing we do. We're born and one day we will die. Oh God, may we live our lives doing what you would have us do. Amen.